The morning of my 30th birthday, I woke up feeling like the luckiest woman alive. That feeling would be dead before midnight. My name is Claire Whitmore, and up until that Saturday in October, I had lived what most people would call a charmed life. Good parents. A warm childhood home in a quiet Connecticut suburb. A career I'd built from nothing, senior editor at a mid-sized publishing house in Manhattan, the kind of job people described as, when you told them about it. A 3-year relationship with a man named Daniel who remembered which brand of coffee made me human in the mornings. A circle of friends tight enough to rent a riverside event space for my birthday party and fill it with fairy lights and photographs of every era of my life. That last part, the photographs, that's where it started. Though I wouldn't understand that until much later, sitting in a hospital parking lot at 2 a.m, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The party was everything I could have asked for. My best friend, Nadia, had organized it with the kind of obsessive precision she usually reserved for court cases. She was a litigation attorney and treated every project, personal or professional, like something that could be cross-examined. So when I walked through the door of the venue and saw string lights threaded through ferns, a photo wall stretching 15 feet with pictures spanning from my gap-toothed kindergarten days all the way to last Christmas, and a bar stocked with exactly the wines I loved, I genuinely teared up. "You're not allowed to cry before 8, Nadia said, pressing a glass of Cotes du Rhône into my hand. I have a strict no mascara policy until at least the 3rd drink. I laughed and let her lead me through the room. My parents were already there, Dad near the bar, doing his thing where he talked too loudly and laughed at his own jokes, but somehow made everyone around him laugh too, and Mom by the appetizer table, looking elegant in the navy wrap dress she'd asked my opinion on twice over text that week. They were the kind of parents people envied. Solid. Present. The type who showed up not just to the big events but to the ordinary ones, Tuesday dinners, random phone calls, the kind of quiet reliability that I'd taken for granted my whole life, and only recently, watching friends navigate complicated family dynamics, had started to truly appreciate. My dad caught my eye across the room and mouthed, "Happy birthday, baby girl," with such earnest affection that I almost lost the mascara battle right there. I should have known that the people who love you the most can also be the ones most capable of destroying you. The party filled up quickly. Friends from college, colleagues from work, a few neighbors from the Connecticut house who'd watched me grow up and still occasionally called me Little Claire, despite the fact that I was 30 years old and 5'7". Daniel arrived looking unfairly handsome in a navy blazer, kissed my temple, and handed me a small box wrapped in gold paper that he made me promise not to open until the end of the night. The room smelled like warm candle wax and good food, and the particular mix of perfumes that meant everyone you loved was in one place. I moved through it all feeling full, complete, like a person who had arrived somewhere, though I couldn't have named the destination. It was around 9 o'clock when I noticed the woman standing near the photo wall. I didn't recognize her immediately. She was somewhere in her mid-60s, silver-haired, dressed simply in a gray blazer and dark slacks, elegant in a no-frills kind of way that reminded me oddly of a retired professor. She was holding a glass of sparkling water and studying the photographs with an intensity that struck me as unusual. Not the casual glance of a party guest admiring decor, but something closer to examination. Her eyes moved slowly, methodically, from one image to the next. I assumed she was someone's plus one. The venue was crowded, the guest list had grown organically, and I hadn't been able to track every addition Nadia had made in the final weeks. But then she turned and our eyes met, and she went completely still. It was the kind of stillness that doesn't happen by accident. Not the freeze of someone caught staring, but something deeper. The specific paralysis of a person who has just seen something they were not entirely prepared to see. Her lips parted slightly. Her hand, holding the sparkling water, dropped an inch before she caught herself. I looked behind me instinctively, because surely that reaction wasn't meant for me. There was no one behind me. I turned back and she was still watching me, not with the glazed curiosity of a stranger at a party, but with an expression I could only describe, even then, even before I understood a single thing, as recognition. Deep, complicated, slightly devastated recognition. I started to make my way toward her. I'm not sure why, some instinct I couldn't name pulled me across the room. Maybe it was the editor in me, drawn to anything that felt like an unresolved tension. Maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe some part of me already knew. I was halfway across the room when my mother appeared at my elbow. "There you are," she said, slipping her arm through mine with a warmth that, in retrospect, felt just slightly too immediate. Too well timed. Your Aunt Patricia is looking for you. She wants a photo for her Instagram. Apparently she's decided to become a social media personality at 67. I laughed and let myself be steered away, glancing back once over my shoulder. The silver-haired woman was still watching me. And this time she was holding something, pulling it from her blazer pocket, unfolding it slowly. What was on that piece of paper? I would spend the next 4 hours wondering. The next 45 minutes passed in the warm, ordinary blur of a good party. Photos with Aunt Patricia, a birthday toast from Nadia that made everyone laugh, and then, unexpectedly, cry, a dance with Daniel that turned into 3 songs because the DJ knew what he was doing. My dad cut in for one song, an old Frank Sinatra track that had been his and my mom's wedding song, though he'd always jokingly claimed it as his and mine first, and I let him spin me around the floor feeling exactly like the child I used to be. Proud of you, kid, he said into my hair. Every single day. That sentence would come back to me later with a completely different weight. By 10 o'clock, the party was at its peak, and I slipped away to the small side hallway near the restrooms to take 5 minutes of quiet. I was leaning against the wall, scrolling through birthday texts I hadn't had a chance to answer, when I heard footsteps and looked up. The silver-haired woman was standing at the entrance to the hallway. Up close, she was striking. High cheekbones, clear gray eyes behind slim-framed glasses, the kind of face that had probably been called handsome rather than pretty even when she was young. She looked at me for a moment without speaking, and in that silence I felt something shift in the atmosphere between us. A pressure change, like the moment before a storm. "I'm sorry to corner you like this," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but underneath the steadiness there was something tightly held, like a hand gripping the edge of a table. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Marsh. I'm not sure if that means anything to you." It didn't. I told her so. She nodded slowly, as though she had expected that. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that I'm not here to cause harm. I've debated whether to come tonight at all. I almost didn't." She paused. "What do you know about the first days after you were born?" The question was so unexpected that I actually laughed, a short, confused sound. "What? Your birth? What your parents have told you about it?" I mean the usual. I was born at Hartford General. October 14th, 1994. My mom had a long labor. My dad fainted in the delivery room, which he still hasn't fully recovered from as a piece of family mythology. I shook my head. "Why are you asking me this?" She reached into her blazer pocket and drew out the folded paper I'd seen her holding earlier. She unfolded it carefully, like it was something she'd handled many times before, and held it out to me. I took it. It was a photograph. Old, the particular faded palette of early 90s film photography, the colors slightly washed, the edges soft. It showed a hospital room. White walls, the green vinyl of a chair, a woman in a hospital bed holding a newborn. The woman in the bed was young, early 20s maybe, with dark hair and gray eyes that were exhausted and radiant at the same time, looking down at the baby with an expression so private it felt almost intrusive to witness. I studied it. The woman meant nothing to me. Then I noticed what she was wearing on her wrist, a hospital bracelet. And on the bracelet, just legible if you looked closely, was a name. Not my mother's name. I looked up at Dr. Evelyn Marsh. My voice, when it came, sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Who is this?" She looked at me steadily. "That is my daughter," she said. 48 hours after this photograph was taken, she came home from the hospital without her baby. The party noise from the next room felt suddenly very far away. Somewhere behind me, I could hear Nadia's laugh, could hear the DJ transition into something upbeat, could hear the ordinary sounds of 30 people celebrating my life. "I don't understand what you're telling me," I said. But the cold that had started somewhere at the base of my spine suggested that I was beginning to. "I think you do," Dr. Evelyn Marsh said quietly. "And I think somewhere you've always felt it." I opened my mouth to respond. And then my mother walked into the hallway. The moment she saw Dr. Evelyn Marsh, every drop of color left her face. "Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations." Now back to the story. I had seen my mother in difficult moments before. I had seen her hold herself together at her own mother's funeral, delivering a eulogy without once breaking down. I had seen her navigate a car accident on an icy highway with a composure that the paramedics on the scene commented on afterward. I had seen her absorb bad news. A cancer scare when I was 16, a financial crisis when I was 20, with the particular kind of grace that seemed to be hardwired into her DNA. I had never seen her look the way she looked in that hallway. It was the look of a person watching something they had spent 30 years trying to outrun come to a stop directly in front of them. "Margaret," Dr. Marsh said. Her voice was careful, controlled. My mother said nothing. Her eyes moved from Dr. Marsh to the photograph in my hand and back to my face, and in that movement I watched her read the situation in real time, watched her understand exactly how much had already been said, and watched something in her. Some long-held structure, some architecture of control she'd been maintaining for decades, begin to fracture. "Mom!" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Do you know this woman?" The pause that followed was 3 seconds long. I counted them. I will count them for the rest of my life. "Claire," my mother said. "Come with me, please. Answer the question." Another pause. She looked at Dr. Marsh, not with anger, not exactly, but with something more complex. A recognition that whatever agreement or silence had been maintained between them was now, at last, over. "Yes," my mother said. "I know her." The word yes has never felt so enormous. She reached for my arm, and I let her take it, partly because I didn't know what else to do and partly because my legs had gone oddly unreliable. She guided me past Dr. Marsh and down the hallway to a small empty room near the back of the venue. A storage room, really, stacked with folded chairs and spare tablecloths, and closed the door behind us. She stood with her back to me for a moment. "Mom!" I kept my voice quiet, but I couldn't keep the trembling out of it. "Tell me what's happening." When she turned around, her face had undergone a transformation I had never witnessed in 30 years. The composed, graceful woman I knew, the woman who had always seemed to know exactly what to do, was gone. In her place was someone who looked, for the first time, genuinely afraid. "How much did she tell you?" she asked. "Enough." "Not enough." "I don't know." I held up the photograph. "She said this is her daughter. She said this woman left the hospital without her baby." I heard my voice crack and pressed through it. "She implied that the baby was me." My mother's eyes closed. "Is she right?" The silence stretched. Outside the door, the party continued its ordinary life, music, laughter, the clink of glasses. The whole world proceeding as though nothing had changed, as though the ground hadn't just shifted on its axis. "Mom! Look at me." She opened her eyes. "Are you my biological mother?" And there it was. The question I had never thought to ask, never had any reason to ask, never imagined would be anything other than absurd. Sitting between us now, real and enormous and impossible to unsay. My mother, Margaret Whitmore, the woman who had raised me, who had sat up with me through fevers and heartbreaks and career crises, who still called me on random Tuesdays just to hear my voice, pressed her hand to her mouth and started to cry. She had never, in my memory, cried in front of me. Not once. That was when I knew for certain. "Tell me," I whispered. "Tell me everything. Right now. All of it." What followed was the most disorienting conversation of my life. Not because of any single revelation, but because of the way each new piece of information rewrote everything that had come before it. It was like watching a photograph of your entire life slowly develop into a completely different image. My parents, Margaret and Tom Whitmore, had been unable to have children. This part one had not known. They had tried for years, had gone through 2 failed rounds of IVF, had finally begun the formal adoption process in 1993. But formal adoption, Margaret said with a steadiness that cost her visibly, had its waiting lists, its timelines, its bureaucratic uncertainty. Tom had a colleague, a man named Dr. Richard Holt, who had since died, who had connections, as Margaret put it, to a private arrangement. Not an official agency. A network of sorts, operating in the gray space between legitimate private adoption and something less scrutinized. "Gray space," I repeated. My voice sounded like a stranger's. "What does that mean?" My mother's hands twisted in her lap. "It means that the paperwork was handled. Quickly. Privately. We were told the birth mother had consented. We were told she was young, that she couldn't provide for a child, that she wanted the baby to have a good life." She looked at me with eyes so full of pain they were almost unrecognizable. "We wanted to believe that. Did she consent?" Silence. "Mom, did she consent?" "I don't know." The words came out broken. I told myself she had. For 30 years I told myself she had. But I always knew, somewhere I always knew, that I didn't actually know. That we had taken what was given to us, and asked the minimum number of questions that allowed us to sleep at night. I sat with that for a moment. The storage room felt very small. The party outside felt like it was happening on another planet. Who is she? I asked. The woman in the photograph. The young woman with the dark hair. Her name is Lily. Lily Marsh. Lily Marsh. The daughter of the woman standing somewhere on the other side of the door, holding 30 years of unanswered questions. How did Dr. Marsh find me? My mother wiped her eyes with a precise, controlled gesture, reaching for composure, finding just enough of it to keep speaking. I don't know exactly. We were always aware it could happen. As the years went by and nothing did, I suppose we stopped waiting for it. She swallowed. I saw her name on the guest list 2 weeks ago. Nadia sent me the final list for the seating arrangements. I didn't know if it was the same person, but she stopped. You knew it might be. A single nod. And you didn't say anything to me. Another nod. Smaller this time. I stood up. I didn't have a clear reason for standing, there was nowhere to go in that small room. But my body needed to move, needed to do something with the energy that was building inside me with nowhere to release. I pressed my hand against the wall of folded chairs and breathed. My entire life had been built on a lie. Not a lie of cruelty, maybe. My mother's grief was clearly real, her love was clearly real, and I understood that people made devastating choices from positions of desperation. But a lie nonetheless. A foundation that was not what I had been told it was. Every story I had ever told about myself. I was born in Hartford, my parents tried for years before they had me. I was wanted so much. I was their miracle, was built on a version of events that had been carefully, deliberately edited. Where is she? I asked. Lily Marsh. Where is she now? My mother's expression shifted in a way I couldn't quite read. Claire. Is she alive? A pause that lasted just a half-second too long. Mom. Is my biological mother alive? The way she answered that question, not with yes or no, but with 3 words I did not expect, sent every certainty I had left crashing to the floor. If you're still watching right now, you're exactly the kind of viewer I love. Subscribe so I can keep giving you stories that touch your heart. Hit that bell, so you never miss what happens next. I don't know how long I stood in that storage room after my mother told me. Time had stopped behaving normally. It moved in strange intervals, 5 seconds that felt like 5 minutes, then a full minute that disappeared without registering. The party on the other side of the door was still playing its soundtrack. Bass from the speakers, laughter, the ordinary percussion of a night that had no idea it was happening inside a catastrophe. My mother's 3 words hung in the air between us, refusing to dissolve. She's very sick. Lily Marsh, the young woman in the faded photograph, the one who had left a hospital in October of 1994 without her newborn daughter, was, according to my mother, critically ill. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, her mother and my biological grandmother, had found me not merely to satisfy a 30-year-old grief, but because Lily was running out of time. I left my mother in the storage room. I'm not proud of it. I could see how much she needed me to stay, to process this together, to offer some version of absolution, or at least presence. But I was not yet capable of giving her anything. I walked back down the hallway with the controlled pace of someone managing a physiological emergency, found a quiet corner near the emergency exit, and stood there breathing until my hands stopped shaking. Then I went looking for Dr. Marsh. She was still near the photo wall. I had the odd feeling she had never moved from that spot, had simply waited there with the patience of someone who had been waiting for 30 years and could manage a few more minutes. She saw me coming and straightened slightly. My mother told me, I said when I reached her. About Lily. About what's happening. Something in her face shifted. Relief, possibly, or the specific loosening that comes when a burden you have been carrying alone becomes, at last, shared. Then you understand why I came. I understand part of it. I need to understand the rest. I looked at her directly. Tell me about Lily. Tell me who she is. Dr. Evelyn Marsh set down her glass and began. Lily had been 22 in 1994. A graduate student, biology of all things, a fact that produced in me a complicated resonance given that I had always, inexplicably to my arts and literature parents, gravitated toward science in school. She had been in a relationship with a man who had disappeared when she told him she was pregnant. A disappearance so sudden and complete it suggested it had been planned. She had intended to raise the baby alone, had set up a nursery in her graduate student apartment, had knitted, actually knitted by hand, a small yellow blanket. She had gone into labor 6 weeks early. The baby, had been healthy despite the prematurity, but the early arrival had sent everything into chaos. Lily, exhausted and alone and terrified, had been approached in the hospital by a man who identified himself as a social worker. He had been kind, gentle. Patient. He had explained over several long conversations during those 2 days in the hospital that Lily's circumstances, the absent father, the small apartment, the incomplete degree, the absence of immediate family support other than her own mother, who lived 2 states away, made her position precarious. That it would be better, for the baby's sake, to make a plan. He had brought paperwork. Lily, 22 years old and barely coherent from the birth, and the shock of early delivery and the terror of doing it alone, had signed. She had regretted it before the ink dried. She tried to reverse it immediately, Dr. Marsh said, and her voice was steady in the way of someone who has had years to make peace with a story that is not, in fact, peaceable. The next day, when she'd slept and thought more clearly, she told the nurses she had changed her mind. She was told the paperwork was already filed, that it had moved quickly because of the circumstances, that she would need to go through the courts. And by the time we engaged a lawyer, the trail had gone cold. The man who presented himself as a social worker had no record at the hospital. He wasn't on staff there, had never been on staff there. The organization he claimed to represent didn't exist. The paperwork had the signatures of witnesses, but those witnesses couldn't be traced. She paused. Someone had made very sure that the transaction was final and invisible. Whoever Richard Holt was and whatever network he was working with, they were practiced. I was quiet for a moment. And Lily spent the next 30 years looking. Yes. She said it simply. Not always actively. There were periods when she had to stop for her health, for her sanity. She built a life. She went back to school, finished her degree, became a researcher. She married a good man named Patrick who understood what she carried and loved her anyway. They have 2 children together, your half-siblings technically, a boy of 21 and a girl of 18. She paused. But she never stopped looking entirely. It was always there. The not knowing. I thought about what it would mean to have a child taken, and I had to call it that now, had to use the accurate word, and then to spend 3 decades carrying the weight of that absence. To build an entire life alongside a wound that never fully closed. What's wrong with her? I asked. What kind of sick? Aplastic anemia. It progressed rapidly over the past 8 months. She's been through 2 rounds of treatment. Dr. Marsh's voice didn't waver, but I watched her jaw tighten fractionally. She needs a bone marrow transplant. Her husband has been tested. Her other children have been tested. Her siblings, cousins, everyone we could find. No compatible donor. The silence that followed had weight. I understood now. The full geometry of it, the reason Dr. Evelyn Marsh had spent weeks or months, or however long it took locating a party guest list, and deciding whether to walk through the door of a venue where her granddaughter would be celebrating a birthday that was, in fact, her granddaughter's birthday. You need me to be tested, I said. I need you to know the truth, she corrected very precisely. Whatever you decide to do with it is yours alone to decide. I want to be very clear about that. I am not here to pressure you. I am not here to make demands on behalf of someone you've never met. She held my gaze. But yes, a biological first-degree match is the best possible chance. And you are the only biological child Lily has ever had. I looked at the photo wall. At 30 years of images, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, graduations, holidays. The documentary evidence of a life that was full and real and genuinely mine, regardless of what I had just learned. My parents, the Whitmores, were in many of those photographs, and the love visible in those images was not fabricated. That was real. It was also built on something they should never have done. Both of those things were true simultaneously. I was learning that truth could be multiple, could be contradictory, could be unbearable, and still have to be held. I need to meet her, I said. Before anything else. I need to. I can't make a medical decision about a stranger. I need to meet her first. Dr. Marsh nodded slowly. Of course. Where is she? Yale New Haven Hospital. She's been admitted since last week. She reached into her pocket again and this time produced a small card. Her business card, with her phone number and email and, handwritten in small precise letters at the bottom, a hospital room number. She knows I came tonight. She was against it initially. She didn't want you to feel obligated or ambushed. I almost laughed at that. And yet I am 70 years old, Dr. Marsh said, with the first trace of something warmer in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. And I have watched my daughter carry this for 3 decades. At a certain point, the risk of doing nothing becomes larger than the risk of doing something. I held the card for a long moment. And then Daniel appeared at the hallway entrance, scanning the room with the particular alert concern of a person who has noticed his partner has been missing for too long. His eyes found me and the concern sharpened into something more focused. I looked at him, then at Dr. Marsh, then down at the card in my hand. I made a decision I would spend the next 12 hours unable to fully process. I drove to Yale New Haven alone. Daniel had wanted to come. He had stood in the parking lot of the venue, one hand on my car door, and made the case quietly and without pressure, which was, I had always known, one of the best things about him. He didn't insist. He offered. He said he would drive separately, would wait in the lobby, would be available or invisible, whatever I needed. He would do whatever served me best. I told him I needed to do this part alone. He nodded, kissed my forehead, told me to call him the moment I wanted company. I sat in the car for 5 minutes before I could make myself start the engine. The drive was 40 minutes on empty late-night highway, and I spent most of it in a state that wasn't quite thought. Things surfaced and receded. My mother's face in that storage room, the faded photograph, my father's voice saying proud of you, kid, every single day without knowing that tonight those words would develop a new dimension. I thought about the yellow blanket Lily Marsh had knitted by hand. I thought about a 22-year-old woman, alone in a hospital room, signing a document she immediately knew she'd been maneuvered into signing. I thought about 30 years of a wound that didn't close. The hospital was the particular kind of quiet that hospitals achieve after midnight, not silent, but subdued, the sounds purposeful and low. I found the room number Dr. Marsh had given me at the end of a corridor on the 4th floor. The door was slightly ajar. Warm light leaked through the gap. I stood outside it for a long time. I had no framework for this. There was no protocol for walking into a room where a woman you had never met was lying in a hospital bed carrying 30 years of grief that was, in some essential and unchosen way, about you. I was not her daughter in any of the ways that word had meant anything to me. I was also, undeniably and biologically, her daughter. Both of these facts were true. Neither of them made the next 60 seconds any easier. I pushed the door open. The woman in the bed was small. That was the first thing I noticed. She looked smaller than a person should in that bed, with the 4-line tracing its path to her arm and the monitors doing their quiet work beside her. She had dark hair, graying at the temples now, and gray eyes that were open and watching the door as though she had been expecting exactly this, as though she had not slept because she could not sleep, because she was waiting for something she had been waiting for far longer than tonight. She saw me, and the sound she made, small, involuntary, a sharp inhale that collapsed into something softer, broke something open in my chest that I hadn't known was waiting to be broken. "Hi," I said. It was an absurd thing to say. It was the only thing I had. "Hi," she said. I walked to the chair beside her bed and sat down. We looked at each other in the way that strangers do when they are not, in any simple sense, strangers, trying to read the landscape of a face that is simultaneously foreign and, in some impossible cellular way, familiar. She looked like me. Not exactly, not in the way that sometimes you see a family resemblance, so pronounced it's almost eerie, but in the way that made sense of certain things I had never thought to question. The angle of the jaw, the particular gray of the eyes, a shade that my parents had always called unusual, had always said came from nowhere they could trace. The shape of the hands. "My mother told me you were against her coming tonight," I said. Lily Marsh's mouth curved fractionally. I thought it was," she paused, choosing. "I thought you deserved to have your birthday. I thought you deserved to have one more night of things being what you thought they were. She came anyway. She's 70 years old and has spent 30 years watching me hurt." Lily's voice was quiet. I stopped being able to argue with her about it somewhere around the 3-year mark. I almost smiled. She seems formidable. She absolutely is. A beat. Where I got it from, apparently. We sat with that for a moment. "I don't know what to call you," I said. It was the truth. The options available to me felt either too large or too false. Nothing fit the shape of this particular relationship, which existed outside the standard vocabulary. "Lily is fine," she said immediately. "Whatever this is, I'm not going to ask you to call me something that belongs to the woman who raised you. That's not why she stopped. Started again. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I want you to know that. Everyone keeps saying that tonight. Because it's true and because you probably don't believe it yet." She was sharp. Even in a hospital bed, clearly exhausted, clearly ill, she was sharp in a way that reminded me of myself at my best, the editor's mind that cut to the precise center of things. I had, up until 7 hours ago, believed I got that from my father. "Tell me about yourself," I said. "Not the Not the story I've already heard. Tell me about you. Something moved in her expression. Surprise, maybe, that this was the direction I was going. And then something softer, something that might have been gratitude. She told me. I listened. She was a molecular biologist. Had spent 20 years working on genetic disease research. Another thing that produced in me that strange resonance, the memories of my own inexplicable pull toward science courses, the biology degree I had nearly pursued before the pull of literature won out. She had met her husband Patrick at a conference in 2002. Had 2 children, Nathan and Elise, who knew about me, or rather, knew about the child who had existed for 2 days and then was gone, had grown up with the awareness of that absence the way children grow up with all the foundational stories of their family, normalizing what they've always known. Nathan wants to meet you, she said. He's been very angry actually. On my behalf and I suppose on yours. He's 21 and has a very strong sense of justice and limited patience for systemic failure. She paused. He's also, I should tell you, extraordinarily similar to you in about 6 different ways that would probably unsettle you to hear listed. This time I did smile. A small one. It felt strange on my face but real. And Elise? Elise is quieter about it. Processes internally. She'll need time. She looked at me steadily. Like you. I stayed for 2 hours. We talked about research and books and the specific exhaustion of careers that required both technical precision and creative judgment. We talked about the absurdity of finding out your entire origin story at your 30th birthday party and the particular dark comedy of life's timing. We did not talk about bone marrow, or testing, or medical logistics, not once, not directly. There was, I noticed, a carefulness in Lily around that subject. A deliberate restraint that told me she understood what it would mean to put pressure on this new and fragile thing between us, and had decided it wasn't worth the risk. I respected that more than I could say. When I finally stood to leave, somewhere around 1:30 in the morning, she looked up at me with an expression that I could tell she was working to keep neutral, to keep free of the weight of need and hope and 30 years of a specific absence, and mostly succeeding. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for being the kind of person I could come to, I said, and meant it in more ways than I could untangle. I was almost at the door when she spoke again. Claire. I turned. She was watching me with those gray eyes. My gray eyes, I was beginning to accept, our gray eyes. I don't need you to decide anything tonight. Or this week. Or, she stopped. I just need you to know that whatever you decide, I am glad that I know you exist. I am glad that you became who you are. And none of that is contingent on anything else. I stood at the door for a moment longer than necessary. What I was about to do, the decision forming somewhere below conscious thought, assembling itself from pieces of grief and biology, and the residue of 2 hours that had rearranged something fundamental in how I understood myself, was not something I could undo. I reached for my phone, and I called the one person I had not yet spoken to tonight, whose voice I needed before I could make the choice that was already, somewhere in my chest, already made. My father answered on the second ring. It was nearly 2 in the morning. He was awake. I had known he would be, because Tom Whitmore, whatever else he was, whatever the architecture of choices and silences that had built the life I thought I understood, was a man who did not sleep when one of his people was unaccounted for. Claire. His voice was careful. He'd spoken to my mother, clearly. He knew some version of what had happened. Where are you? Hospital parking lot. I watched my breath fog in the October cold. The car window cracked an inch because I needed air. Yale, New Haven. A beat. Are you okay? I don't know. I was quiet for a moment. I need to ask you some things, and I need you to be honest with me. Completely honest. Whatever it costs you, whatever it costs us, I need the truth tonight. I heard him exhale. A long, slow breath that carried in it, I thought, 30 years of anticipation. Ask me. I asked him everything my mother hadn't told me. About Dr. Richard Holt, and what exactly they had known and when. About the degree to which they had understood that the network they used was operating outside any legitimate framework. About the moment, if there had been one, when he had looked at the situation clearly and known that the paperwork in their hands was not as clean as they needed it to be. He told me the truth. It was worse than my mother's version in some ways. More explicit in what they had understood and elected not to examine. He had known Richard Holt's arrangements existed in legal shadow. He had known that the speed of the transaction, paperwork processed in 48 hours, baby placed within the week, documentation that materialized with suspicious completeness, was not consistent with anything legitimate. He had known and had chosen, as he put it with a flatness that told me he had rehearsed saying this to himself many times, to be grateful instead of curious. Why? I asked. Not with anger. I was past the anger phase temporarily, had passed through it somewhere in the hospital corridor, and come out the other side into something colder and more complex. Why didn't you ask more questions? Because I was afraid of the answers, he said. Because your mother had been through so much and you were there, you were real and small and perfect, and asking the questions that needed asking felt like it could take you away. He paused. I know what that sounds like. It sounds like every person who has ever done a wrong thing for a comprehensible reason. Silence. That doesn't make it right, Dad. No, he said. It doesn't. I sat with the phone in my hand and thought about the man who had danced with me to Frank Sinatra 3 hours ago, who had spent 30 years being unambiguously present, who had built a life of demonstrable love and care around a center that was rotten. Not rotten in malice. That was the thing I had to keep returning to, because malice would be simpler. Rotten in the particular way that fear can make people rotten. In the way that desperation can make people look away from things they should look at. I met her, I said. He didn't ask who. How is she? Sick. I closed my eyes. She needs a bone marrow transplant. She might need it from me. The silence on the other end of the phone was thick with things he was deciding not to say. I waited. What do you want to do? He asked finally. Just that. No guidance. No preference. Just the question, offered back to me like a clean instrument. I want to be tested, I said. Another silence. Then that's what we'll do. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I hadn't realized, until that moment, that I had been crying for the last several minutes. Not dramatically, not the heaving grief crying I might have expected, but quietly, steadily, the way water moves when no one is making a fuss about it. I'm still angry at you, I said. I know. I don't know how long that lasts. I'll be here when it's done, he said. I believed him. That was the most disorienting thing. That even now, with all the scaffolding stripped away, I believed him. Love was not the same as honesty. I was learning that in real time. I hung up and sat in the parking lot for a while longer, letting the cold do its work. Then I called Daniel. He answered immediately, clearly not asleep, and I told him where I was, and 25 minutes later his headlights swept across the parking lot, and he pulled in beside me and got out of the car without a word and opened my door and held out his hand. I took it. Do you want to talk or do you want to sit here? He asked. Sit, I said. For now. We sat. The testing happened 9 days later. Dr. Evelyn Marsh connected me with Lily's oncology team, and the process was clinically straightforward. A blood draw, then a cheek swab, then the waiting that all medical processes eventually reduce to. I went back to work. I answered the emails that had piled up during the week. I had taken off to process the upheaval of my own biography. I started slowly and awkwardly and with several false starts, the conversations with my parents that I knew would take months or years to complete. The conversations about what they had done and what it meant, and whether the word forgiveness would eventually mean something in this context. I also started talking to Lily. Not daily. It was too new and too strange for daily, for the kind of easy frequency that implies a history you don't yet have. But regularly. Phone calls, a few of which lasted longer than I expected. A coffee, 3 weeks after the party, at a cafe equidistant between New Haven and Manhattan, where we spent 2 hours talking about molecular biology and the politics of academic publishing, and what it felt like to read a book that recalibrated something in your understanding of the world. Nathan joined us by video call for the last 20 minutes, his young face intense with an earnestness that was, she had been right, uncannily similar to something I recognized in myself. Elise sent me a text the following day, brief, careful, warm in the way of someone who was offering something small as a first step, and I replied with the same care. I was building something. I didn't know what to call it yet, didn't want to reach for words that were too large for what currently existed. But it was real, and it was growing, and it was mine in the way that only chosen things can be yours. The results came on a Thursday afternoon in November. I was at my desk when my phone rang. I saw it was the number I'd stored under Dr. Kim, Lily's team, and my stomach performed a complicated maneuver. I stepped into the empty conference room, closed the door, and answered. The compatibility results, Dr. Kim told me, were, and here she used a word that doctors apparently reserve for moments of genuine medical surprise, remarkable. Not merely a workable match. A near-perfect HLA compatibility, the kind of result that appeared in a small percentage of sibling matches and almost never in any other biological pairing. "This is exceptional," she said. "This is exactly what we hoped for." I sat down in one of the conference room chairs. Through the glass walls I could see my colleagues moving through their ordinary Thursday. Manuscripts on desks. Coffee cups in hands. The ordinary ongoing life of a world that had no idea. "Okay," I said. My voice was steady, which surprised me. "Tell me what happens next." What happened next was a process, consultations, medical clearances, the logistics of donation that were more involved than a simple blood draw, but less overwhelming than I'd feared. I went through it with the same efficiency I brought to large editorial projects. Systematically, with my questions written down, with Daniel beside me at every appointment, with Nadia on the phone every evening providing the combination of practical advice and genuine feeling that made her the best person I knew. My parents asked if they could help. I told them, after thinking about it for a week, that yes, there were specific ways they could help, and I listed them, and they did those things without question or complaint or attempt to make my acceptance of their help mean more than it meant. It was a start. The donation procedure took place on a gray February morning, and if I'm being honest, which I've decided going forward to be about everything, I was frightened. Not catastrophically, not in a way I couldn't manage, but with the specific quiet fear of a person doing something that cannot be undone, whose irreversibility is precisely the point. Lily and I were not allowed in the same room during the procedure, for medical reasons that Dr. Kim explained, and that I accepted without fully retaining. But beforehand, in the pre-procedure waiting area, they allowed a brief visit. She came in wearing a hospital gown and the same quiet sharpness she'd had the night I first met her, despite or because of the exhaustion that was written clearly in her face. She sat in the chair beside the bed they'd set up for me, and we looked at each other. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know. I need you to know that I would have, that my feelings about finding you, about knowing you are not." "Lily." I stopped her gently. "I know. I already know that." I looked at her, the gray eyes, the angle of the jaw, the particular face that was mine and not mine. "I'm not doing this because I owe you something. I'm doing it because I want you to have more time." She pressed her lips together in a way that I had already, in a handful of conversations, begun to recognize as the thing she did when she was keeping herself together with effort. "And," I added, "because you knitted a yellow blanket." She laughed. It was a sudden, startled, real laugh that cut through the hospital atmosphere like light through a window. And in it I heard something that I had heard before, in a different context, on a different face. I sounded like that when I laughed. I had always sounded like that. My parents, the Whitmores, had told me every year of my childhood that I had a laugh that could change the weather. Now I knew where I got it from. The months that followed were not simple. I want to be accurate about this because stories about discovered families and medical miracles tend, in the telling, to smooth out the rougher textures, to compress the actual experience of rebuilding, which is slow and nonlinear and full of regression, into a clean narrative arc. The reality was messier and, I think, more honest. My relationship with my parents, the Whitmores, went through phases I hadn't anticipated. There was a period in February, a few weeks after the donation, when my mother and I went nearly 2 weeks without speaking, not because of a specific argument, but because I had run out of emotional capacity and needed space that she found difficult not to interpret as rejection. We worked through it, eventually, in the way that people work through difficult things. Imperfectly, with setbacks, with the occasional conversation that opened wounds instead of closing them, and then with the slow accumulation of smaller moments that rebuilt something between us. My father, unexpectedly, became easier in some ways after everything was out in the open. There is a certain kind of man, and Tom Whitmore was this kind, who is destroyed by secrets and liberated by the removal of them. He was still ashamed. He would be ashamed for a long time, probably always. But shame in the open air was, it turned out, something he could carry better than the concealed variety. He and Lily spoke twice by phone in the spring. I had not asked for that to happen, had not arranged it, had stayed deliberately clear of it. He told me afterward, briefly, that it had been the most difficult conversation of his adult life. I asked if he was glad he'd had it. "Yes," he said without hesitation. Lily's transplant had its own timeline, its own complications. She developed a secondary infection in March that set her recovery back by 6 weeks and produced the worst 10 days I had experienced since the November consultation when everything had still been unknown. Nathan texted me during those 10 days with an uncharacteristic frequency, not asking for anything, just present in the way of someone who needed to know there was another person holding vigil from a different address. In April, her doctors used the word responding. In June, they used the phrase encouraging trajectory. In August, on a warm evening in New Haven, Lily and Patrick and Nathan and Elise and I had dinner on their back porch. Daniel was there and Dr. Marsh, and a neighbor who had apparently been part of the fabric of Lily's life for decades and had cried when she heard the news of the match and whom I liked immediately. It was loud. It was complicated. At one point Nathan and I got into an argument about the ethics of pharmaceutical data licensing that lasted 40 minutes and resolved into the kind of mutual respect that only comes from genuine disagreement taken seriously. Elise showed me photographs on her phone from a photography project she was working on, austere, beautifully composed images of urban architecture that were genuinely extraordinary. And I told her so and watched the careful reserve in her face shift, fractionally, toward something warmer. Dr. Marsh sat beside me for a portion of the evening and didn't say much, but at one point during a lull, she turned to me with those clear gray eyes and said, "She stopped looking for you because she had to. She never stopped knowing you were out there." I thought about what it means to carry a knowledge like that for 30 years. To build a life that is real and full and worth having, and to carry alongside it, always the particular weight of a missing piece you cannot stop feeling the shape of. I thought about my own life, the one I had lived in complete ignorance of all of this, the one that was genuinely mine, genuinely good, built with the love of people who had failed me in a specific and serious way and loved me truly in every other. The way truth can coexist with love without canceling it. The way an origin can be complicated without negating everything it produced. I thought about the yellow blanket. And then Lily came back from the kitchen with another bottle of wine and said something that made Nathan groan and made Elise laugh and made Patrick look at her with the expression of a man who has watched someone he loves fight very hard and win. And I sat at the table in the warm August evening and let myself be part of it. There is a question people ask when they hear this story, and I tell it more than I expected to, because keeping it private felt like one secret too many in a life that had been shaped by too many already. The question is, who are your real parents? I understand why people ask it. The word real is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's trying to find the solid ground, the definitive answer, the clean resolution. It wants the story to organize itself into a recognizable shape. Parents or not parents. Family or not family. Real or not real. I've stopped trying to answer it that way. What I know is this: Tom and Margaret Whitmore raised me. They made choices that were wrong and that I am still, in ongoing and imperfect ways, in the process of integrating. They also loved me without reservation for 30 years and built me into a person capable of walking into a hospital room and making a choice that would not have been possible without the particular kind of rootedness they gave me. Both of these things are true. Lily Marsh grew me from nothing and lost me before she was ready, and spent 30 years carrying that loss without letting it consume her, and came back, through her mother's courage and her own, to find me in time. I am built from her biology and, I'm beginning to understand, from things that are not just biology. The shape of a laugh, the angle of thought, the specific way we both go quiet when something matters too much for words. Both of these things are also true. Nathan calls me occasionally to argue about things. Elise sends me photographs. Dr. Marsh emails with the precision and affection of a person for whom these two qualities are not in conflict. Daniel, who stayed through all of it, who held my hand in parking lots and waiting rooms and across tables where I was trying to find words for things that hadn't had words yet, asked me to marry him on a Sunday morning in October, 1 year exactly after the birthday party that changed everything. I said yes before he finished the sentence. He laughed. I laughed. It changed the weather. What I know at the end of it, at the end of this particular chapter, which is, I understand now, also the beginning of several others, is that identity is not a fixed coordinate. It is not the address printed on your birth certificate, or the name your parents gave you, or the story you were told about where you came from. It is, instead, something built, slowly, from the materials available, with the people willing to do the work alongside you. I am Claire Whitmore. I am also newly and permanently Lily Marsh's daughter. I am the woman who walked into a hospital at 2 a.m. on her 30th birthday, and walked out carrying a truth she hadn't known she was missing. I am what 30 years of love, imperfect, complicated, real, made me. And I am only just beginning to understand what comes next.